Several weeks had passed since Ahsoka's return from her vacation, during which she had not only enjoyed a great recovery but had also learned a new force power. Namely, the power of giant growth. On the planet Tarka, with a somewhat backward civilization, she had grown to an enormous size of 170 meters. This power seemed to be accessible only to togruta women, and since Ahsoka had learned of it and could harness this power, her thoughts revolved around it incessantly. While she had tried to immerse herself in her Jedi training once again, she could hardly concentrate. Her thoughts kept drifting, and she found herself imagining all the things she could do as a giant. Vivid memories of her vacation as a giantess. Walking through a bustling city with thousands of panicked people at her feet, running for their lives, played in her mind. People who were afraid of being crushed underfoot by her like insects. These thoughts made her heart race with excitement, but of course, Anakin, who knew nothing of her new abilities, was less than thrilled with her lack of concentration. He suspected that her trauma from the recent battles was still affecting her deeply, and she needed more rest. For this reason, he had sent her on missions only sparingly, allowing her to focus on meditation. One day, Ahsoka was called to the bridge of Anakin's Star Destroyer. There, she found a group of Jedi and admirals gathered around a holographic map of a densely populated planet. They were discussing the recent attacks of giant droids that were wreaking havoc on the planet. The droids were nearly 300 meters tall, and the Republic forces had no idea how to fight them without putting innocent lives at risk. Anakin examined the droids, saying, "They almost look like ordinary battledroids. Why should it be so hard to destroy these clankers?" Mace Windu raised an eyebrow with a hint of annoyance, responding, "Because these combat robots are gigantic in size. Simply the massive metal they're constructed with makes them more durable than any armored vehicles we've ever encountered." Admiral Yularen affirmed, "That's correct. We'd have to bombard them from orbit with our most powerful weapons, and even then, it's uncertain if we'd be able to destroy them completely." Anakin grew thoughtful, realizing, "But by doing so, we'd also put the civilians at risk." Risk? We're talking about the destruction of millions of lives here. General Grievous strategically placed these combat robots in a metropolis. Each shot from one of our Star Destroyers would be a catastrophe on the ground. In essence, he's rendered us practically helpless, Mace Windu explained. Anakin slammed his hand on the table, exclaiming, "But we have to take action. These giant robots are already killing countless civilians, and as long as we don't comply with the Trade Federation's demands, they'll continue to take lives." As if to emphasize his point, the holoscreen displayed the metallic foot of a giant robot descending onto a group of people, crushing them mercilessly. Ahsoka listened intently to the conversation, and her mind began to race with ideas. She knew that her new power could be the key to defeating the droids, but she wasn't sure if it was safe to use in such a populated area. As the conversation continued, Ahsoka's thoughts drifted to her training and her new power. She began to imagine herself growing to the same size as the droids, and using her strength and agility to take them down. But she didn't know how the other Jedi would react to her new force power. After all, that was a pretty rare and admittedly crazy ability that she had. And she preferred to keep it to herself. Master Yoda sensed that Ahsoka may have a solution. Curious, he asks her, "An idea you have, young Padawan?" Ahsoka's heart skipped a beat as Master Yoda's voice broke her train of thought. She turned to face the diminutive Jedi Master, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She knew that her new power could be the key to defeating the droids, but she was afraid of the reaction of others because her suggestion would seem very, very strange. Yes, Master Yoda," she replied hesitantly. "I was just thinking that maybe I could use my new power to take down the droids." The other Jedi and admirals looked at Ahsoka in surprise. They had no idea that she had a new power, let alone one that could be used to fight the droids. Anakin stared at her in disbelief, his expression a mix of curiosity and surprise. "Wait a minute, what kind of new ability is this?" Ahsoka sheepishly scratched her head, her montrals twitching. "Well, I never told you, Master." "Perhaps because I felt uncomfortable about it." Anakin was puzzled. "Why would a new ability make you uncomfortable?" taking a deep breath, Ahsoka admitted, I can become a giantess. To be precise, I can become extremely gigantic, even larger than these combat robots. Mace Windu, the seasoned Jedi Master, raised an eyebrow with a calm demeanor. Interesting. That could be a valuable asset. Anakin, on the other hand, displayed a mix of amazement and irritation. What? You can become a giant? But how? I have never heard of such a force ability. Yoda spoke up, heard of this, I have. A togruta ability, it is. Very few beings in the universe possess this ability. Truly rare. And great potential it holds. Admiral Yularen, being more focused on strategy and logistics, chimed in, it might provide a tactical advantage if used prudently. Ahsoka, who felt quite uncomfortable with the whole discussion, was surprised by the Admiral's reaction, saying, Admiral, aren't you surprised at all? You're taking in this information so casually. The Admiral shrugged, replying, nothing surprises me anymore when it comes to you Jedi. But let's get back to the mission. So, is your proposal to engage these robots as a giantess? Before Ahsoka could respond, Anakin shook his head, no. This won't work. Do I have to state the obvious here? If Ahsoka as, a 300-meter giantess, fights these robots, it will also cost numerous lives. Ahsoka, I respect your powers, but I doubt you'll be able to avoid destroying buildings and trampling people. Mace Windu looked at Ahsoka, asking, what do you say to this objection? Young Padawan Ahsoka took a deep breath and began to explain, it's true. I might cause harm, and possibly even to some people, well, by crushing some underfoot, but I also possess the power of healing and protection. So, I can at least try to keep the casualties low. Anakin shook his head again, but Ahsoka. When you are a giantess and your boot comes down on people, the result will be the same as with the robot we just saw. At that point, force shielding or healing won't be of much help. Ahsoka's heart was racing, but she had to say it, I won't be wearing any boots, Master. I'll be barefoot. Honestly, I've tested this before, during my vacation. I tried stepping on people barefooted without harming them. If I concentrate and act slowly, everyone remains unharmed. Of course, this time will be different because it's a combat situation. But my soles are soft, and I can be careful. I promise I'll do everything to minimize the casualties. Anakin rubbed his forehead, oh, this can't be serious. It is serious, Master. If I take off my shoes, most people who get under my bare feet will survive. Perhaps not all, but most. Anakin remained unconvinced, saying, this is ridiculous. And shaking his head once more, Yoda, on the other hand, was fascinated by the idea. A great idea, this is, he said, stroking his chin. Indeed, bare feet the risk of injury would minimize. My blessing you have, young Padawan. The other Jedi and admirals looked at Yoda in surprise, uncertain whether to trust his judgment. But Ahsoka knew Yoda was wise, and she had complete faith in his judgment. I think it's worth a try, she said firmly. It's the best way I can think of. Or do you have a better idea? Admiral Yularen cleared his throat. No. No better option. If what you say is true, then it will be best to send you to defeat the robots. We'll provide cover from the orbit and keep other starships at bay in the meantime. Yoda gazed intently at Anakin. Do you have concerns, Master Skywalker? Yes, I certainly do. I'm not comfortable sending my apprentice into battle alone. Besides, this whole thing of becoming gigantic and stepping on people doesn't sit well with me either. He looked at Ahsoka. Even if you're barefoot, you'd still harm and even crush some people, and you'd feel it intensely. Having that power over lives and taking lives so easily, it could lead you to the dark side. Yoda nodded. Dangerous, it is. To fall to the dark side, you must not. Nevertheless, the best solution it is. Will you resist? Ahsoka nodded. I admit, I thoroughly enjoy being enormous and powerful. But I will manage. Trust me, Ahsoka was aware of the risks and the dangerous aspect of her new power, but she was also determined to use her abilities to combat the threat posed by the giant droids. Mace Windu nodded and said, I agree with Master Yoda and the Admiral, it's our best chance. Ahsoka is young, but she can handle it. Anakin had no choice but to relent. Very well, then. So be it. But we'll monitor everything from the orbit, and if there are any problems, I'll be there immediately. A bridge officer stepped in front of the gathered Jedi and admirals and informed them that they would soon exit hyperspace and reach their destination. Admiral Yularen nodded and ordered all crew members to go to their battle stations. Abruptly, as always, Anakin's Star Destroyer emerged from hyperspace, along with several accompanying ships. However, their arrival was anything but peaceful because they immediately encountered an imposing fleet of the Trade Federation, personally commanded by General Grievous. The Republic had intercepted the Trade Federation, and a fierce space battle erupted instantly. Laser fire illuminated space, fighters pursued each other, and the powerful warships of the Trade Federation fired upon the Republic ships. During the battle, Ahsoka made her way to her A-wing in the hangar. She was ready to dive into the fray and fight the gigantic droids on the planet. But before she boarded her ship, Anakin briefly held her back. He wished her good luck and advised her to be mindful. He still had concerns about her plan to transform into a giantess and battle in the city. He wanted to ensure her safe return. Ahsoka smiled and thanked her master. Then she climbed into her A-wing and flew out of the hangar, heading for the planet, skillfully avoiding enemy fighters and the chaos of the space battle. Ahsoka landed her A-wing on a hill just outside the massive metropolis. Even from a distance, she could see the gigantic robots causing considerable damage. The city looked minuscule in comparison to the colossal droids that marched through the streets like metallic giants. Ahsoka exited her spacecraft and recalled the teachings from the ancient Jedi book she had read to master her ability to grow to unfathomable sizes. With concentration and inner calm, she began to alter her size. Slowly and gently, she continued to grow, reaching a height of 280 meters, her most significant growth yet. In her enormous form, Ahsoka felt powerful and, at the same time, profoundly responsible. She could see the world around her in a way that no one else could imagine. The distant city now resembled a model town, and the forests seemed like blades of grass at her feet. She took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. To save the city, she had to stop the colossal droids. Her first step was to remove her boots and place them next to her relatively tiny A-wing. She chuckled as she realized that her A-wing could easily fit inside one of her boots. Barefoot and towering, she felt the ground beneath her feet in a way she had never experienced before. The terrain was much softer and more yielding than usual. She could feel the trees and the earth beneath her bare soles, and how everything beneath her was deeply pressed into the ground. Each step she took crushed numerous trees, leaving deep footprints in the earth. The world seemed to transform around her as she walked as a giantess in the natural landscape. Ahsoka gazed at one of her large footprints and couldn't help but smile, realizing that her colossal imprints would likely become a permanent part of the area, which was fascinating and awe-inspiring. But she needed to focus on her mission. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the metropolis, two massive droids strode through the city, letting their heavy steps thunder down on smaller buildings. They laughed and jeered at the planet's inhabitants, whom they saw as nothing more than pesky insects. With every step, they crushed houses and people, and their metallic tumult filled the streets. "These little beings are truly laughable," said one droid with a mocking metallic voice. "They actually believe they can stand against us," the other droid agreed. "Yes, and their local military is just as laughable. Look, a few more hover tanks are coming." As if they could stop us, the two droids confronted the hover tanks, and with effortless ease, they trampled the vehicles and the soldiers inside. With their blasters, they opened fire on the artillery vehicles in the distance, silencing them. No one seemed to have a chance against the overwhelming droids, and they relished their destructive spree. Droid 1, I think we're exceptionally lucky to have been constructed as giant robots and not like our small counterparts. Droid 2, you're right. The average life expectancy for regular droids in combat is less than 4 minutes. But we're practically invincible. Droid 1, yeah. Our job is the best. For fun, he allowed his metallic foot to hover over screaming city dwellers, then stamped down fiercely, crushing them entirely. A group of city residents, including Twi'leks, Zobraks, and Duros, fled in panic from the approaching giant robots. The streets were filled with chaos and destruction, and the thunderous stomping of the robots resonated in their ears. People watched in disbelief as the colossal machines crushed buildings and numerous individuals under their mighty feet. Desperation was palpable as they realized they were too slow to escape the robots. One of the droids, while mercilessly destroying some buildings, looked down at the fleeing residents and began to jeer, "You're nothing more than pesky insects. Your city belongs to us." Finally, the droid raised a foot over the group of city residents. With a terrifying crash and roar, those who couldn't escape quickly enough were simply crushed by the robot. Their cries fell silent as their bodies were obliterated in a fraction of a second. Suddenly, one of the droids noticed something in the distance. Droid 1, did you see that? Ahsoka Tano is approaching. Droid 2, that's right. I see her. But wait. Something's not right. She looks much larger than in our databases. Droid 1, that's impossible. Our information about her is current and accurate. Droid 2, perhaps she's grown up? Biological beings do get bigger. Droid 1, but not that big. It doesn't make sense. Droid 2, regardless, we should open fire on her before she attacks us. Ahsoka opened a communication channel to Admiral Yularen. Admiral, how many giant combat robots are there on this planet? We've registered 16 so far, but there could be more, Yularen replied, quick and agile. Ahsoka drew her now gigantic lightsabers and deflected the blaster shots from the giant robots. The shots were sent back, destroying the heads of the robots, causing them to fall lifelessly to the ground and burying numerous buildings beneath them. Ahsoka looked shocked at the massive destruction caused by the falling robots. Darn it. I need to get closer and somehow minimize the damage next time. What was that? Yularen asked over the comm. Oh, nothing, Admiral. You can remove 2 robots from the list. That leaves 14. Ahsoka's gigantic figure now stood directly in front of the metropolis, which sprawled out before her like a carpet, and she could see the damage caused by the giant robots. To locate the other robots, she had to roam through the city. However, with her impressive size of 280 meters, her feet occupied most of the street's width. She moved carefully through the city, but it was inevitable that she would crush some vehicles and objects under her gigantic feet. As she looked down at the countless fearful city dwellers, some of whom were fleeing in panic while others gazed up at her in awe, Ahsoka waved to them and said simply, "Hello down there. Don't worry, I've come to save your city. I'll always be careful, but please stay away from my heels. I can't guarantee you'll survive if you get under my heels because that's where the pressure might be the strongest." People tried to make way, but since her feet were unfortunately much too wide, it was nearly impossible to escape them. Yet, her soft foot soles prevented people caught under her feet from being hurt. Ahsoka had remarkable control over her power to avoid harming the people. She couldn't help but chuckle as she stepped on more and more people, feeling them moving under her bare sole. A Twi'lek boy called up to her, "Ahsoka. You saved us. The robot almost killed us." Ahsoka, who was like a walking tower, squinted shyly. "Oh, I'm happy to help. But I have to step on you and everyone with you next so I can keep going. Please don't be upset with me, and please be careful not to get under my heel or other high-pressure points." Okay, she slowly lowered her barefoot onto the crowd, gently pressing them to the ground again. Some were trapped under the balls of her foot, others between her toes. Once more, nobody was hurt, but she knew that the streets were getting increasingly crowded as she moved further into the metropolis. The likelihood of her accidentally crushing people was growing with each passing minute. But she also knew she had to keep going because the combat robots cared nothing about human lives and simply continued their destruction. End for Part 1. To be continued in Part 2. That was Ahsoka vs. Giant Robots Part 1. Thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If yes, then please subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. For exclusive stories, pictures and more, check out our Patreon or DeviantArt pages. This way you can also support our work and help us produce more content. Thank you.